Welcome. My name is Jamie Watts. I'm an account manager here with Bender Consulting. I've been with Bender for about 12 years, so I've done just about everything that there is to do here. But my primary responsibility is working with our employees once they come on board to mentor them through, getting started at work and any accommodation processes, performance management, talking about disability at work. All those things kind of fall into my purview. So I wanted to welcome you to our first webinar series for 2017. If you were here last year, you remember that we kicked off our inaugural Bender webinar series, and we talked all about leveraging disability as part of your career search. So this year, what we will do is again try to tie it all together with the theme, but really talk about building your personal brand. So as you go out to look for a position, whether you are a job seeker with a disability yourself or whether you're assisting folks with disabilities in securing employment, then what does that look like? How do you build your brand? I'm sorry, do we have a question? Okay. I just got some audio here. If everyone could just be on mute, that would be great. This conference call is being recorded today and will be available on our website. And so I had a question earlier before we started about a transcript that will also be available, and Gerald will be in touch with all of you providing that transcript. We may even post that to our site. So all those things will be available as part of this call. I appreciate everyone joining. So today what we're really going to focus on, to kick off this webinar series about building your brand, is what does it mean to be a self-advocate in your career search, whether that's while you're looking for a job or after you've secured a job. What does that look like? So I just, before we get started, I want to provide a few details about Bender. If you're not familiar with us, Gerald, if you could go to the Bender slide, that would be wonderful. And so if you look at Bender as a company, we do bring over 20 years experience in recruitment and hiring of individuals with disabilities. A couple things about our president and CEO, Joyce Bender. She is the past chair of both the American Association of People with Disabilities and the National Epilepsy Foundation. She has her own internet talk radio show, Disability Matters with Joyce Bender, that airs Tuesdays at 2 o'clock on Voice America. Now, if you want to listen to any of those prior shows, they're all archived on our website, so you could review them if you chose to do so. And I would encourage you to do that. There's a lot of really great resources on there. She will have guests from different nonprofit organizations, federal government, and also private industry. So it really is a good mix of folks. Just in terms of our background, we do support both private and public sector organizations, mostly around disability employment in terms of bringing folks on board, but also doing strategic planning and training. And I've listed for you on that slide just a few of the customers that we have served. Okay, so let's move along. I alluded to the Bender services, as a whole, but I want to talk, if you look at the third slide, slide 3 talks about kind of the different areas that we provide services. Our core business really falls into our talent programs area, and that's where we recruit and hire individuals with disabilities for competitive jobs. IT, finance, accounting, HR, business, really for the, again, private sector and federal government. Our college partnership program falls into that, recruiting students from universities. Again, I referenced our workplace mentoring services, where I oversee and work with employees as they come into work. And of course, if you've participated in our virtual career fairs, those also fall into talent programs. In terms of strategic planning, we've helped companies write accommodation policies and recruitment strategies and develop core partnerships within the disability community. In terms of training, we've had a significant development this year in that we rolled out, we've always had kind of our focus on ability training, but we have rolled out in the last year, what is called our iDisability training. So iDisability is really, if anyone has taken coursework in terms of disability employment, so probably if you're working somewhere, you had to take some type of security awareness or privacy training. Everybody has to take some type of course related to that. So we have rolled out our iDisability product, which is really aimed at integrating into existing learning management systems programs around disability employment. So how to interview someone with a disability, how to accommodate them, how to accommodate various disabilities, how to accommodate mental health issues in the workplace. And we've rolled this up into a package that is 20 courses currently available. So we've sold that in the private sector. So that's a really exciting development since we met with you last. We continue to have our accessibility testing and our accessibility certification. So I just wanted to say a few things about that before we got started into the meat of this training course. So before I continue, I'm just getting a lot of background noise on the audio line. If I could please ask that everyone mute, because this course is being recorded and it will be posted to our website. So I really appreciate that as well. Okay. So in terms of what I want to cover today with everyone, again, we're going to focus on self-advocacy. So what does it mean to be a self-advocate if you're a person with a disability? And how do you self-advocate as you're looking for a job? And how do you self-advocate once you're in the workplace to make it more welcoming and inclusive for yourself and other individuals with disabilities as well? Okay. So what does it mean to be a self-advocate? So if you look up self-advocacy, this is the action of representing yourself for your own views and interests, right? So I have no problem telling you that I'm a person with a disability myself, as are like 90% of our workforce here at Bender. And so all of us who have worked and gone into some type of professional development have had to go through, what does it look like? What is that journey to becoming a self-advocate? So this means, don't assume that people understand things about your disability, but you need to demonstrate that you have knowledge of your own disability and what works for you and maybe where you've struggled in the past and what has been a good solution. Being assertive, taking initiative in your career search and at work once you get into the workplace and have tasks assigned to you. So we'll look at that in general. So what does it actually mean to self-advocate in your career search? That is the slide I'm on. I believe it is slide 8. Gerald, if you're following me. So engaging in a self-driven career search. What this means is really taking that initiative to go out on, different websites and go out and attend different career events like our virtual career fair or different job fairs at your university or in your community. All that's really important. Really taking ownership of what that search looks like. Building an online profile that's a strong representation of your skills. So when I mentioned this, what I'm specifically referring to is a platform like LinkedIn, for example. So a lot of employers today, when they go out and they review resumes of candidates, they're not only looking at the paper documents you submit, they're Googling you and they're checking out your Facebook and your LinkedIn profile and some of those other professional networking sites. So making sure that it's built to reflect the best possible representation of you, because that is also your digital footprint is part of your brand. completing all paperwork and submitting all requested paperwork, applications, resumes, and forms. So many times when we're onboarding candidates, we get a paperwork request from a customer, and those things really, because of the pace of business, just need to be turned around as quickly as possible. So anytime that you can complete those and return them, requesting and returning phone calls and interview requests promptly. Again, these companies are wanting to get candidates into interview as quickly as possible. So anytime that you can get those set up quickly, it's to your advantage as a candidate. Request accommodations if needed, and make sure that you understand the process. So you may need some type of accommodation. Maybe you don't need accommodation at work day to day, but you need some type of accommodation, extended time to complete a test evaluation, for example. Make sure that you request that as early as you can and understand what the process is by working with your recruiter. Again, this next one is a big one for individuals with disabilities: transportation, right? So I, as an individual with a disability, do not drive, as do many of my other colleagues and counterparts. So making sure that you've identified not only a plan A to get to your interview, but a plan B, C, and D, so that you have the backup plan. Arrive early and be prepared. So come with your documents, everything filled out that they've given you, and be prepared to discuss those items. Don't bring anyone with you unless they're providing an accommodation. So there have been a couple times in my career where I'll go to pick someone up for an interview and they've brought an additional person. Now, if this is something for your interview, sign language interpreter, potentially maybe even a personal care attendant, if there's something that you would need specifically during the interview, those types of things might be acceptable. But in terms of like a parent or just an external person, it might be better for them to potentially go get a cup of coffee during the time that you are interviewing. Again, answer questions thoroughly and honestly. So if you're asked a question, make sure that you provide an answer that addresses all parts of the questions. I would suggest, though, not discussing your disability during the interview unless it specifically relates to an accommodation. So your disability should not come up during the interview. The manager should not be talking about it, and you really should not be talking about it either, or encouraging your clients or students to also minimize discussion of disability in the interview as well. Unless it relates to a specific accommodation that you would require either for the interview or for the job itself, and that would relate to the process that you would go through to request that accommodation. Also, it's not necessary to talk in detail about private health information. That is your own, as a candidate, your own private healthcare information. Again, not to be shared with the employer or potential employer unless it becomes related to an accommodation. Let's see. Be prepared to answer any questions about gaps in employment. So this is particularly common in the disability community. If you have sustained a life situation or a health situation that resulted in a gap in your resume, be prepared to talk about that. That you had to take a leave, but that you're ready to return to work and excited to contribute. That's kind of how I would address it. I had to take a leave, but that all the issues have been addressed, and now I'm ready and excited to return to work, and this is how I feel like I could utilize my skills. So again, focus on the skills and abilities you have and explaining what you can do in a positive light. I think sometimes people are concerned about being honest on the interview, so they want to be forthright and say things like, well, I can do this, but I can't necessarily do this. It's not really necessary to talk about what you can't do. You should focus on, the things that you can do and the things that you can contribute to the position. Again, you want to send a thank you note as a follow-up to that interview and provide any subsequent materials requested in a timely manner to the interviewer. So all those are strategically important during your career search. But what about once you get to work, right? So what does it mean? We're going to look at self-identifying versus disclosing a disability at work. What does it mean to actually integrate your disability into your day-to-day in the workplace? So I am on slide 10 for those following along. You might look at something like disability employment and think about, what is in it for the companies? Why is it so important? And it is a priority issue. If you've looked around and done research for companies and federal agencies, you'll see that there was some guidance that came out in 2013 for a long-standing regulation. It was Section 503 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973, and that Section 503 had been in place for a long time, but it had never really been enforced. And so in 2013, that's when we finally achieved guidance on how to implement that rule. And part of that rule is a 7% utilization goal for federal contractors for individuals with disabilities. So what does this mean? It means that if you are a government contractor and you want to compete for federal contract dollars, you've got to have that 7% utilization, not just in certain groups of your organization, but across all groups within your organization. So federal contractors are really looking to hire folks with disabilities. And conversely, the federal government is also looking to be an employer of choice for people with disabilities and really looking to leverage what's called its Schedule A hiring authority. And if you're not familiar with Schedule A, that is a hiring authority, non-competitive hiring authority for individuals with disabilities. You can apply for a position non-competitively, but you have to have a Schedule A letter that can be given by, for example, a vocational rehabilitation counselor or some other type of professional of that nature. A doctor, for example, can issue a Schedule A letter, but it gives you access to the non-competitive hiring authority. So these really do represent opportunities for people with disabilities to gain employment, but you have to be proactive and informed and utilize some of these things that are in place. So what can you do to again build your brand and be a self-advocate in this area? You'll want to, if you're applying to a federal contractor, self-identify, right? And so there's a difference, and you'll see on my slide here, a difference between self-identification and self-disclosure. So you can identify as a person with a disability and say, my name is Jamie Watts, I'm a person with a disability, is a lot different than my name is Jamie Watts, I have cerebral palsy. So I'm not required to disclose disability information, but I could self-identify as a person with a disability in general. Now, if you are requesting an accommodation, that requires a certain level of disclosure. If you're requesting, for example, some type of flexible schedule or a chair or, some type of equipment, Dragon Naturally Speaking, for example, any of those things would require some type of disclosure, probably with an HR entity. So, just moving along here, I wanted to spend at least one slide, and on slide 11, I highlight kind of the difference between accommodation and advocacy at school versus at work. So when you're in school, especially in high school, for example, accommodations are identified by your teacher or education professional. The school provides those evaluations and information is shared with parents, and there's an assigned case manager. But when you get into college and later into employment, the student or the employee is identifying those needs. The student is responsible for those assessments and evaluation. Information is shared with the students. Students may choose to have their parents involved, but that's not a requirement. When you become an employee, information is only shared with the employee, and parents are not involved at all. So school is kind of that go-between where the individual can decide if their parents are involved, but in employment, information is only dealt with the employee. Also, accommodations are provided in the workplace when it's reasonable. So you have to look at, what is a reasonable accommodation, and that's usually worked out with the HR organization. But again, it's really left to, in the latter case, the student or the employee to be their own self-advocate as opposed to it being driven by the parents in earlier iterations of school. So I think that's a really important concept to grasp in terms of who kind of has control at those different times. So, looking at self-identification versus disclosure at work, kind of break it down into 3 areas. So, when do you self-identify or disclose? To whom do you do that? And how do you do that? So, you have the ability to disclose before the offer is made. Again, it sort of ups your chances from a diversity perspective because of some of the regulations that I highlighted. You can disclose after you've gotten an offer, but before you've actually started working there. This might occur if you're requesting an accommodation before your start date, for example, a workplace modification or a modification to your workspace, or during your employment. So this during your employment is particularly important. As part of the Section 503 that I mentioned, companies are required to do periodic surveys of their workforce to account for any individuals with disabilities. So maybe you have decided that, I'm not really comfortable disclosing or even really, self-identifying when you first start working because you don't know the people and you don't know the culture. You're not sure how it's going to be received. But, 5 years in, you're pretty comfortable. You've made a lot of contacts. You've gotten involved with some of the employee resource groups, and so now you feel comfortable self-identifying. Additionally, perhaps you are an individual who started working, and when you started working, you did not have any sort of disability, but you have acquired a disability during your time working there. So the periodic employee survey is the time to self-identify as an individual with a disability and later disclose if you would need some type of accommodation. Disclosure is a very personal choice. I know for me personally, I'm very open about it, and I encourage people whenever possible and as much to their comfort level as possible that they can be open about it. I encourage them to do that, but I also recognize it's a very personal choice. Now, so who are the folks that you would actually be talking to about either self-identifying or disclosing disability information? You might talk to your HR person. You might talk to your manager if you have a really good direct relationship with your supervisor, or you open an accommodation request. You might be working with those folks in terms of disclosing disability information. Colleagues, so maybe you're working on a project with some team members, and all of a sudden, because of a situation, you now have an influx of medical appointments that you need to be attentive to. That might be a situation where you're talking to colleagues so that you can manage your work effectively. Or if you're involved, for example, in what's called employee resource groups at work, that can be a great and safe space for disclosure and for self-identification. So how do you go about, the self-identification and disclosure process? So again, I talked a little bit earlier in this presentation about Schedule A, the hiring authority within the federal government. There's a form that subsequents that. So in order to apply, you have to get a scheduling letter, but then once you're selected for an opportunity, you have the voluntary opportunity to complete what's called the SF-256 form, which is standard form 256, self-identification of disability. So it categorizes a wide variety of individuals, it categorizes a wide variety of types of disabilities, and it codes them. So you don't write down your specific disability. What you do is you enter the code that most closely resembles that disability. And it's particularly important because the government within its operations not only seeks to hire individuals with disabilities, but has a sub-goal to hire a certain amount of individuals with targeted disabilities. So this SF-256 form also allows you to identify, if applicable, as a person with a targeted disability. So completing those forms is particularly useful. Again, you want to self-identify as an individual with a disability with a federal contractor so you can help them meet those objectives and drive business, because really if it drives business, it's also driving your own, compensation and ability to move up in the role, etc. You can meet with your hiring manager or professional, or again, open a ticket with the accommodation team as you're working through the accommodation process. Usually in large companies, you have to open a ticket. You're assigned an accommodation specialist who works with you on what is most appropriate. So those are just some of the logistical items to think through in terms of self-identification and disclosure. I know we're right up against the time here, so I want to just highlight quickly a few things that you can do in terms of self-advocacy at work, and then we will open it up for questions. So again, as soon as you get the job offer, you want to accept, you want to complete everything on time, request accommodations early. This is an important one, so I actually want to spend some time on this. So a lot of times, as I've managed people, one of the trends that has emerged is that someone will be working there and may not feel comfortable right away talking about disability or talking about needed accommodations, so they won't ask for the things that they need. And then we get 3 or 4 months in, and the person starts to have difficulty and says, well, I would have done a lot better if I would have had X, Y, Z accommodations. So I always encourage people, don't wait until there's a performance issue to identify the need for accommodation. Speak up right away so that we can get you exactly what you need, so that you can get off on the right foot and blow everyone out of the water. Because I know that, with the right accommodation, people can be extremely successful. Again, so we talked a little bit earlier, and one of the reasons I talk so much about our training project is because everybody's going to have, when you get into the workplace, some type of training requirements. You don't want to get on the list where you haven't completed a training requirement. Engage with employee resource groups. So I supported a customer of ours for about 10 years. In the last 3 of those years, I was working with employee resource groups, not just disability, but the other 8 employee resource groups as well. A lot of these groups focus on, gender, ethnicity, orientation, all these things. So I encourage everyone as much as possible to get involved as much as your schedule allows, and also to attend any company events. A lot of the ways that you make connections is through volunteering and getting involved. Ask effective questions and document what those responses are so you can go back to your notes and, you don't have to ask duplicate questions. Again, this is for everybody working, right? We all want to deliver projects on time or ahead of schedule. Again, if you're as flexible as possible, that's how you can kind of get picked up for various projects in your organization. So as much as you can demonstrate flexibility, again, focus on the skills that you bring to the project. Be proactive and make conversations solutions based. So again, if you have an issue about accommodation or you're having a certain struggle at work, come to your manager not just with the problem that you have, but some potential solutions that you've thought about in terms of what that looks like. So those are just some ways that you can be a self-advocate in the workplace. So really self-advocacy permeates, before, during, and after, all through the career search. So, with that, please feel free. I know we're right up against the time, but please feel free to ask any questions. I'm actually reading a note from Gerald. Right. So you can, if you're on Skype, you can submit those via the chat feature, and we'll address them here. If you're on the phone and you have a question, we can take them over the phone, and I'll have to indicate what those are. But Gerald, do we have any chat questions at this time?
We don't at this time. If anybody has them, we'll give a few moments for people to get those together, and if not, we'll finish up here.
Okay. Anyone on the phone have any questions? Okay, we'll just give a couple more minutes. Gerald, if anyone's typing or anything.
It doesn't appear that anyone. Oh, we've got a question typing right now.
You're asking about janitorial positions? Okay, so thank you for the question. Gerald, we got a question over the phone about janitorial positions. Unfortunately, we don't get a lot of janitorial type of positions. We have a wide variety, but right now, in terms of supporting some of our private sector and federal positions, we do not specifically have anything related to janitorial. But you have like a vocational rehabilitation counselor or anything right now that you're working with? Okay. Okay. Yeah, so the answer to the question, I asked this person, for those who can't hear on the Skype, I asked this person if they had a vocational rehabilitation counselor that they were working with. That would be a good resource to get started, because that individual could connect you with some employers in the area that might be looking for the type of service that you're interested in. Additionally, if you, like you mentioned, going to different schools and so forth, or looking at your current school, which are all good opportunities, ways to plug in that way. So that would be my recommendation. We do have one other question from the Skype, from Mary. It says, how do people find out more about Schedule A, the Schedule A letter? Thank you very much for that question. The Schedule A letter. So, my suggestion for finding out more about the Schedule A letter would be to visit opm.gov, the Office of Personnel Management. So they are like HR for the entire federal government, and they have several resources on that site for learning information about Schedule A. And that will tell you like who can write it. They actually even have like some sample Schedule A letters, so you know exactly what needs to go in there. And we'll go from there. I think Gerald told me that we had to make that the last question, and I apologize for that. That we ran up against the time. I see we had a question come in, so if anyone wants to submit questions here, I'm happy to answer those, and we'll post those as available. And and I encourage everyone to join our next webinar for the month of June. I think it's on the 21st, and please join us, and we'll have all the information from this webinar posted to our website following the call. Any questions? All right, with that, we're going to close, and thank you very much. to go in there, and we'll go from there. I think Gerald told me that we had to make that the last question, and I apologize for that. That we ran up against the time. I see we had a question come in, so if anyone wants to submit questions here, I'm happy to answer those, and we'll post those as available. And I encourage everyone to join our next webinar for the month of June. I think it's on the 21st, and please join us, and we'll have all the information from this webinar posted to our website following the call. Any questions? All right, with that, we're going to close, and thank you very much.